Welcome to The Survival Historian, where the grit of human endurance meets the unforgiving lens of time. Today we're standing at the intersection of survival and permanence, examining something that outlasts empires, outlives generations, and, well, really mocks our modern assumptions about progress. Imagine running your hand across a timber beam pulled from a Viking longship, its surface still solid after 1,000 years beneath the waves. Now think about that pressure-treated deck you installed just 5 years ago, already showing the telltale signs of rot and decay. We've convinced ourselves that technological advancement means improvement in every arena, but when it comes to lumber, we've somehow gone backward. The question isn't just what ancient builders knew that we've forgotten, it's what we've deliberately sacrificed in our relentless pursuit of speed and profit. Today we're unearthing the truth about wood that was built to last forever. Picture a Norwegian stave church standing silent in the mist, its wooden skeleton intact after 8 centuries. Now contrast that with the rotting fence posts in your neighbour's yard, barely a decade old. The difference isn't mystical, it's molecular. Modern lumber comes from what we might call fast food trees, cultivated in plantation forests where growth is accelerated through selective breeding, dense planting and heavy fertilization. These trees are harvested at 20 to 30 years old, sometimes even younger, their wood characterized by wide growth rings and low density. Where ancient timber grew slowly over centuries, developing tight, compressed grain structures that packed strength into every inch, modern lumber is the wooden equivalent of empty calories, bulky but lacking substance. The cellular structure tells the story. In slow-growth timber, each annual ring is narrow and dense, creating wood with high lignin content that acts as nature's own reinforcement. Modern fast-growth trees produce wood with less lignin and more of the softer cellulose matrix, making it structurally weaker and more vulnerable to microbial attack. Then comes the processing. Ancient builders air-dried their timber for months or years, allowing the wood to naturally stabilize and shed its vulnerable sapwood moisture. We kiln-dry lumber in days, forcing moisture out rapidly and creating internal stresses that compromise the wood's integrity. The chemical preservatives we inject afterward are band-aids on a fundamentally inferior product, fighting battles that ancient wood never needed to fight. When you examine timber from ancient structures under magnification, you're looking at something fundamentally different from modern lumber. Old-growth trees develop massive quantities of heartwood, the dark, inactive core of the tree that's essentially the timber's fortress. Unlike sapwood, which transports nutrients and remains vulnerable to fungi and insects, heartwood is saturated with natural chemical compounds, tannins that poison fungal growth, phenolic compounds that repel insects, and oils that naturally resist moisture penetration. A beam cut from the heart of a 500-year-old oak is essentially pre-treated by nature itself, armed with centuries of accumulated biochemical defenses. The preservation of ancient wood in archaeological contexts reveals another stunning truth. When Viking ships sank into anaerobic mud or when Roman timbers were buried in waterlogged bogs, they entered environments where decay simply couldn't function. Decomposition requires oxygen. Microbes that break down wood need to breathe just as we do. Deprived of oxygen but kept wet, wood enters a state of suspended animation, its cellular structure intact for millennia. This wetwood archaeology has given us perfectly preserved vessels, tools, and structures that reveal construction techniques we're still studying today. The wood didn't just survive by accident. It was chosen for specific properties and placed in circumstances that its ancient users understood, however intuitively, would ensure its survival. Ancient preservation wasn't passive. It was an active practice woven into every stage of timber use. Japanese temple builders developed a technique called shosugi-ban, deliberately charring the surface of cedar planks until a layer of carbon formed. This blackened skin became armor against insects, fungi, and even fire, extending the wood's life by centuries. The Vikings coated their ship timbers with tar and train oil rendered from seal blubber, creating a hydrophobic barrier that shed water like a duck's feathers. Roman engineers built bridge foundations using oak timbers that they'd first soaked in lime or bitumen, understanding that sealing the wood's pores prevented the moisture ingress that spawns rot. But the most sophisticated preservation was built into the design itself. Ancient structures used what we might call protection by architecture, post and beam construction that elevated timber off damp ground, massive overhanging eaves that kept rain away from walls, and joint designs that allowed air circulation while shedding water. Every mortise and tenon joint was cut with drainage in mind. There was a reverence for the material, a cultural understanding that wood was precious and deserved careful handling. Communities maintained collective knowledge about which trees to harvest, when to cut them, and how to season them properly. A master carpenter might select a specific oak for a cathedral beam decades before it was needed, marking it for harvest at just the right moment in its growth cycle. This wasn't just craftsmanship, it was a relationship with the forest that treated timber as a living legacy rather than a commodity. Our lumber crisis is ultimately an economic one. In a market demanding cheap construction materials delivered quickly, the patient practices of ancient forestry became commercially extinct. Plantation forestry can grow, harvest, process, and deliver lumber in a fraction of the time it takes a tree to develop significant heartwood, and the market rewards this speed with profit. The consequence is a built environment designed for obsolescence. That deck fails in a decade, generating demand for replacement lumber, which creates continuous revenue streams but also mounting waste. Landfills fill with treated lumber too toxic to burn, while forests are stripped to feed the replacement cycle. Yet emerging research offers hope. Scientists studying ancient wood's molecular structure are developing biomimetic treatments that mimic natural preservation compounds. Thermal modification processes that heat wood in oxygen-free environments can replicate some properties of slow growth without chemicals. There's growing interest in extending harvest rotations, even if modestly, to improve lumber quality. The economic case is building itself. When construction projects must budget for replacement every decade, the lifetime cost of cheap lumber often exceeds the upfront cost of better material. We're beginning to understand that true sustainability isn't just about replanting trees, it's about growing and using wood in ways that honor its potential to last. The ancient timber that survives today stands as testimony not just to past skill, but to a fundamentally different relationship with time and resources. Those builders thought in centuries because they lived in cultures that valued permanence. They selected their materials with the expectation that their work would outlive them, their children and their children's children. We've optimized for quarterly earnings and immediate gratification, and our lumber reflects those priorities. But survival, true survival, has always demanded the long view. The wood that lasts 1,000 years teaches us that quality is never an accident, that nature's designs are often superior to our shortcuts, and that the materials we leave behind speak volumes about what we valued. As you walk through your world, notice the wood around you. Consider what it will become in 100 years, or whether it will even exist. The ancient forests may be gone, but their lessons remain embedded in every surviving beam and plank. We can't turn back time, but we can choose to move forward with wisdom rather than mere efficiency. Sometimes the old ways weren't just different, they were better. Thank you for joining us on The Survival Historian. If this journey through time and timber resonated with you, hit that like button, share this with someone who appreciates the intersection of history and survival, and subscribe for more insights into how our ancestors' knowledge can guide us through modern challenges. Until next time, remember, survival isn't just about enduring, it's about building things that endure long after we're gone.